Trump is on a collision course with the US budget. There has been endless speculation about the chaos that may or may not await America and the world following the US President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration on January 20. No one knows how much Mr. Trump's stated agenda is for real and how much of it is a political posturing for his base, a show of power for his enemy, or part of a negotiating strategy vis-a-vis Congress and various foreign friends and adversaries. But for all of his bluster and devotees who want to create alternative realities, Mr. Trump cannot repeal the laws of arithmetic and as much as he may try in the weeks ahead when the government hits the federal debt limit. Government deficits are the difference between annual revenues and expenditures, and the national debt is the sum of past deficits. These facts have real political implications because the United States has a statutory debt ceiling by law, and there is limit to how much it can borrow. On December 28, Janet Yellen, the outgoing Secretary of Treasury, provided official notice that the ceiling would hit between January 14 and 23. By taking extraordinary measures, President Joe Biden can pass the problem to the incoming Trump administration as a parting gift in return for Mr. Trump's refusal, supported by Elon Musk, to go along with the deal that had been made earlier. With a $367 billion monthly fiscal deficit in November and a 2024 fiscal deficit averaging to $150 billion per month, it won't be long before the current debt ceiling is breached. Meanwhile, extremists in the Republican Party are insisting that the ceiling not be increased, which means that the would have to be eliminated entirely. If Mr. Trump cannot bring all the Republicans along, he will need to secure some support from the Democrats by reaching a new agreement on the debt ceiling and future deficits. But why should the Democrats agree to increase the debt ceiling if it is merely enables Mr. Trump to reward Mr. Musk and other oligarchs their support by giving them a massive and unjust tax cut? All this congressional politicking over the deficit and debt represents only one horn of the budget trilemma that Mr. Trump will face on day one. Taxation is second horn. If there is only one thing that Mr. Trump and his cronies are truly committed to, it is cutting taxes for corporations and billionaires. Their guiding principle is to make permanent the reckless tax cuts that Mr. Trump signed during his first administration, many of which are set to expire at the end of 2025, and to lower still more taxes on US corporations. Most estimates suggest that doing so would add $7.5 trillion to the national debt, though the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget's top end estimate is double the amount. Of course, Trump administration will promise some growth miracle, trotting out the old card about tax cuts paying for themselves. Never mind that this has never happened, not for the 2017 tax cuts and not after Ronald Reagan's tax cuts in the 1980s. This brings us to the third horn of the trilemma, expenditure cuts. It is well known that most US government's expenditures are not discretionary. They are uncommitted to programs like Social Security, which even most Republicans are loath to cut. Moreover, nearly half of discretionary spending goes to defense, another budget item clear to Republicans. That leaves only around $750 billion in non-defense discretionary spending to account for. To eliminate that deficit, Mr. Trump would have to eliminate all non-defense discretionary government programs. Even then, he would be left with $1 trillion annual hole before getting his tax cut, which becomes mathematically impossible if only a handful of Republican lawmakers keep their promise not to increase the deficit. Of course, a bipartisan compromise is still possible that would entail a progressive tax reform and provisions to strengthen the government programs that have played such an important role in millions of Americans' lives. Judging by Mr. Trump's record, such compromise will not come easily. There will be chaos, as we have already saw with the near shutdown of the federal government days before Christmas. The solution on that occasion was to was to kick the can down to the road until Mr. Trump is in White House. An open letter to Professor Muhammad Yunus. Hasina took away your bank and you have now served revenge. Here's the test. Now that you have the public office, it implies public trust. Can you have it and do nothing with it? And if you would, what would it be? At the very outset, I'm conflicted about whether I should congratulate you or commiserate with you. Usually, one wouldn't need to qualify such a brilliant ascent to power with caution. But the challenge of leading a large populous and still largely poor nation in the subcontinent cannot be taken lightly. Nevertheless, congratulations first. When I had the privilege of spending a couple of days with you at a large philanthropy conference in Hubli, Dharwad in 2016, I was awed by your sincerity, gentle manner, and yet a firm belief in your ability to master the arts. In a video interview we recorded, you told me the story of how Sheikh Hasina has taken away your bank, and you responded by taking your bank overseas. You refused to bait of what was probably a too clever by half response from me that her government took away your bank and you took revenge by building one overseas. You said you were not seeking revenge but just doing the right thing. I could see then that you were angry, hurting, and holding back. The opportunity came last August in an incredible dramatic meltdown of an Hasina government. You were brought back from an overseas to head the new administration. Though you still haven't given yourself an executive or political title, you have stayed with the chief advisor and will probably go with that to Davos next later this month. Can I round off this part of my letter by suggesting that Hasina took away your bank from you and you have now served revenge by taking away her government? I can say this with no judgment. She was obviously deeply unpopular. The latest election was an even bigger sham than the one before it. In fact, it was almost like what the Pakistanis conjured up earlier by keeping the leading party and its leader Imran Khan out of contest. Can I suggest that while you may have been nursing your wounds, you weren't prepared for this dramatic turn unless you believed in astrology like most politicians do and have served services of a brilliant astrologer, certainly one better than L.K. Advani's, who failed him completely on the promise of his inevitable rise to the prime ministership. Dr. Manmohan Singh taunted him during the debate on the nuclear deal that he was trying to topple him because his astrologer has promised him the prime ministership. Dr. Singh also used to make another important point. He said, "You had told Musharraf in the first meeting, you and I are both accidental leaders of our countries. Public office is like public trust. We can't have it and do nothing with it." His message to Musharraf was that we should engage seriously and resolve the chronic India-Pakistan issues. These conversations were published in his lifetime. Can I humbly beseech you to apply the same test to yourself? Your situation, as in your dramatic rise, is far from akin to Dr. Singh's than Musharraf's. Musharraf's rise was accidental or dramatic to that extent. In Pakistan, every army officer thinks he can be the president from the day he gets commissioned. Yours was even more fortuitous than your economist peers in India. So here's the test. Now that you hold public office, it implies public trust. Can you have it and do nothing with it? And if you would, what would it be? Restoring democracy, rebuilding and legitimizing the institutions, and then walking away, leaving behind a grateful nation, you might say is what you want to do. And though this is excellent list of KRAs, question arises, how much time do you give yourself to achieve this? Do you have a finish by date, or what in our business call a deadline, by the way, I am struggling to meet right now as I type this letter to you. You have talked about setting different commissions to formulate reforms. Good idea. Just that in our countries, such commissions tend to be self perpetuating. I noted in your relevant interview to Al Jazeera that you aren't giving any finish date. In fact, in that conversation, you even mentioned that this could take up 4 years. Do you really have that much time? Uh, we can all see you in an excellent health, and may you live a long and even more fulfilling life, continuing on in power in this kind and makeshift arrangement, however, has a short half life. Your bigger adversary, the dominant political parties, are already beginning to get impatient. I also don't believe you want to become the subcontinent's Bishop Mugabe or Mahathir Mohamad. You are way well too educated and wise to harbor such delusions. You are keeping the Islamists quiet through your appeasement, but they are going to get more impatient as the time passes. Plus, they have now a view of kind of a republic they want. The biggest trouble you have brought upon yourself is in promising to usher in a new republic in Bangladesh. Bangladesh's constitution has had too many iterations as Pakistan since 1972. You're not going to write an entirely fresh constitution, deal with the Democrats and the Islamists, and also keep in mind your own philosophical views. Such miracles are not pulled off easily, especially without a constituent assembly, a parliament, conventional politicians. Do you really think a top down constitution would have a legitimacy? And if so, for how long? Our experience from Bangladesh and Pakistan suggests that the next guy will bring his own constitution. I note with concern that one ploy your administration is using to keep the population patient is the oldest trick in our neighbor's playbook, anti-Indianism. It's familiar but dangerous ploy. It's tempting to play Pakistan against India, but it would deliver anything more than the joy of trolling India, which you perceive as Hasina's friend. I am not sure. In fact, I would have used the word juvenile with joy, but I don't with difference to your ears and intellect. This is very little, if anything, all that Pakistan can offer Bangladesh except political, philosophical, and sectarian baggage. India is the only neighbor that matters to you, and Bangladesh is our most valued friend in the East. Why would you want to mess up this relationship? As a close watcher on these issues for decades, I can see India means no harm to Bangladesh, nor has Bangladesh for almost 2 decades now. Though much mischief was done in the past, Hasina reversed that, and India will be deaf, blind, and brainless to not appreciate and acknowledge that. It also worked well for Bangladesh as it enjoyed high growth and improvement in social indicators. There are no outstanding issues between us. There are only shared interest and areas of mutual benefit. If your irritation with India is that Hasina is here, you really do not expect India to hand her over to you. Even if it is tough to get off that curb, I would suggest you avoid making it a zero sum game in our ties. And finally, a point for you: what's your day after retirement plan? The subcontinent's unelected rulers have an exit problem. Not one has been able to go into retirement to play golf, write books, or resume running his business. What's your plan, and do you have a schedule? Unless, of course, you are convinced that after you are done, you will be hailed as the new Banga Bandhu, as the original is erased from the history and memory. Fun, harm, and a fine line. Fun side of social media amplification of fake news. Nobody got hurt. Someone built a campaign around an admitted hoax and deserved to reap the rewards. The Enron egg has been viral on social media for a while. This white egg shaped tabletop device is touted as the micro nuclear reactor that can power a home for 10 years. It's fake, of course. After Enron went bankrupt, its name and logo were purchased by content creator who specializes in satire, and clearly so. The device was launched by Connor Gados, Chief Executive Officer of the Enron. Mr. Gados is also co-author of Birds Aren't Real, a book that debunks online conspiracy theories. The name itself triggers doubts since Enron suffered a spectacular bankruptcy. A passing knowledge of nuclear power is enough to tell you egg is pure science fiction. Dozens of fact checkers pointed this out, and lots of posters have crafted jokes and memes about it. But through sands of credulous folks did assumptions, it was true. The new Enron will presumably monetize this. This is the fun side of social media's amplification of fake news. Nobody got hurt. Someone built a campaign around an admitted hoax and deserved to reap the rewards. However, 6 months ago, we saw the dark side of social media amplification of fake news. On July 29, a teenager ran amok at a dance class in the South English town of Southport. He stabbed many children. Three died. The perpetrator were Excel Radu Kabana, a 17-year-old British citizen born in Cardiff. He was Rwandan origin from a Christian background. He is now being tried on charges. So the connection is straightforward. The more engagement a post can generate, the more likely the ad revenue. The more controversial the tweet, the more likely to generate engagement. Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who goes by the name Tommy Robinson and runs the extreme right English Defence League, is supposedly worth well over £1 million. Mr. Robinson is serving an 18-month sentence for defying an injunction to post misinformation about 15-year-old Syrian refuge. He has over a million followers on X and a thriving presence on Facebook. He was kicked off Twitter in 2018 and was reinstated by Elon Musk, who has also campaigned for his release. Mr. Robinson is not only perpetuating an ideology based on lies and misinformation, he's made a good living out of hate posting. Contrast these two examples of exploiting the features of social media for personal gains, you get a sense of where the current free speech versus fact check debate could lead in terms of real life consequences. Peddlers of misinformation often demand suspension of fact check because it may impede free speech. But in fact, fact check doesn't impede free speech. Indeed, Enron was upfront in fact checking itself, and flat earth physicists are free to post theories as they please. But shouting fire where there isn't one can trigger a stampede. Misinformation about a murderer's antecedents can trigger riots, and recommending a drug used for deworming horses as COVID 19 treatment can exacerbate a pandemic. Free speech shouldn't be curtailed merely for conveying misinformation or expressing unpalatable or hateful opinions. It should be limited only when it has the potential to cause harm. Unfortunately, the fact checking misinformation doesn't stop its spread on social media, but it does provide a filter that can reduce egregious harm. A fact-checking mechanism, as fact-checking mechanisms are removed, we can expect more in the way of Southport-style riots. Corridor of Uncertainty. With a microphone in hand, Rohit Sharma delivered his most memorable performance in the recently concluded Border Gavaskar Trophy. During a 15-minute interaction with Star Sports, 13-7-year-old extolled his selfless virtues and brushed off speculation. Life won't change by what people with a mic, pen, or laptop write or say. They don't won't decide when we should retire and when we should sit out or when we should captain. I think I'm sensible man, father of two kids, and I know what I need in life. Sharma is indeed a sensible man, and the decision to retire ultimately remains a personal one. But anyone who has watched him bat in the last six tests will agree that he is a player past his prime. Since the Bengaluru test against New Zealand last year, he has scored 122 runs in last 11 innings. His defensive game has deserted him. He is abysmally low on confidence, and he lacks mental fortitude for the rigors of long form cricket. Sharma's loss of form and captaincy status has been under tense scrutiny. Like Sharma, Virat Kohli has done precious little with the bat on his ill-fated tour. The most uh, has solutions to the most complex cricketing issues, but he has no answers to the delivery outside his off stump. On 8 occasions in this series, he was caught fishing at deliveries in the corridors of uncertainty. For the past 15 years, the cover drives has been Kohli's signature shot. It's a shot he can play in his sleep, something that is ingrained in his muscle memory. Against Australia, Kohli was unable to execute it. When that happened, his scoring opportunities also diminished because unlike some of his peers, Kohli doesn't have a cut shot and his offside game is surprisingly limited. You can cover the drive away from Kohli and he looks a fish out of water. Great players always innovate and find ways to get off the slump. Over the years, Sachin Tendulkar's unbeaten for 241 in Sydney has gained mythical proportions. It was fascinating inning, restrained one in which the master set aside his ego and cover drive to roar back into form. Despite the lack of cover drive, Tendulkar more than made up for it by unfurling the straight drives, gorgeous flicks, and emphatic cut shot. The 241 not out was aesthetically pleasing as some of his other career defining innings. 15 wasted years. Cities that are at the cutting edge of national development are also visibly sites of change. Their physical, social, and intellectual infrastructure is transformed in 15 years. If you compare Seoul between 1970 and 1985 or Shanghai between 2010 2025, they appear to be two completely different cities. This was also the case. In fact, for Delhi between 1995 and 2010, the Delhi that hosted Commonwealth Games was unrecognizable as the town arrived in the kid as a decade and a half later. Since then, Delhi has stood still. As the city state goes to polls next month, it is worth reflecting on how the past 15 years have been wasted. Nothing of importance has been built other than the complex of what was once Pragati Maidan and some large cosmetic structures. Even these are in response to specific demands from the highest levels of union government and do not basically represent a transformation of average city dwellers' experience of the capital. The period has also been the period of Aam Aadmi Party's ascendance in local politics. Commonwealth Games kicked off serial winters of protest that we saw in the city between 2011 and 2014. The political movements that birthed the party that then dominated politics at the state level in Delhi. AAP and Arvind Kejriwal must answer the question, how have they transformed the lives of people of Delhi in this period of power? They must answer this without defection and transference. Yes, of course, the union government has made their life difficult, but it has done so for all state governments, many of which have nevertheless been able to work to improve their citizens' lives. Delhi has been the location of economic and entrepreneurial energy since 2010 at a level unprecedented in its history, surpassing Mumbai and Bengaluru in many ways. How has that been reflected in cities' urban fabric or its governance? To be fair, when it first came into power, AAP and Mr. Kejriwal did in fact have a different, a unique vision for local governance, which set them apart from traditional parties. Even if one that was somewhat naive, Mr. Kejriwal's book on Swaraj in politics spoke of radical decentralization as the answer. Some of us, no friends of anti-corruption movement, nevertheless thought that this component of AAP ideology could make it appealing or for an emergent urban middle class in places beyond just Delhi. The promise of new schools, local input, and of Mahalla clinics seem to be genuine implementation of this decentralization of agenda. If implemented properly, it could lead to implementation and accountability at the most local level of the Indian state. the sphere of governance where this country has traditionally been greater failure than its peers. But these clinics may have not worked as planned. Many of the shuttered for lack of staff. Others have witnessed shortage of medicines and other necessities.